Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar session today on Signals Understanding the Coronavirus Crisis. We are happy to count with you today again. So as a quick reminder, your microphones are muted by default, but if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the question dialog box for that purpose. Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our Signals webinar number 6. This is part of our ongoing program to help us all understand the current context as it evolves and as we all start planning for the future. Today, we'll again share with you updated findings from all around the world, eyewitness account on the ground. We will also share our experience on how we all need to transform our ways of working to make sure that we succeed in this new context. So what we're going to go through today, first of all, Simon will update us on our available resources on the story so far, and Chris will share 5 things that we've learned and that we feel impact what brands have to think about these days. Then we will have a snapshot on how this applies to India by Rinku in Delhi. Nick will then describe how we are adapting to allow our products to continue innovating and what we need to be thinking of as we move along those lines. And we will end with Craig, who will describe how organizations are responding to new customer expectations while they are also following new regulations, for example, on social distancing. And with this, I will leave the floor to Simon and Chris.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everybody. As Jennifer says, our focus very much now is what happens next, and our aim is to be on hand to support you in your own work to understand exactly that. Today, we've put in place our latest research digest, which is a partner to this webinar, and it includes a focus on India, and we're delighted, as Jennifer mentions, to have Rinku with us to share with us her experiences. Every week, we publish new expert analysis. We're going to hear in a moment from Craig and Nick. We've also published today a piece on what's in many ways a bellwether sector, the automotive industry, and that's available now. But I think what's imperative for all of us is to really stay close to how attitudes and behaviours are changing over time and in different contexts. And we've been monitoring this since February, and we're very delighted for today's session that Chris has accepted the challenge to pull together from the latest data 5 themes, 5 things to know in 5 minutes. And Chris, thank you very much for taking this delve today. Over to you.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much, Simon. So yes, we're going to do a very quick tour of key learnings from our Essentials tracker. And for those of you who might not be familiar with what that is, Essentials is our global weekly syndicated tracker of attitudes and behaviors. Each week, we connect with 1,000 consumers per country in 16 major markets around the world. So that's kind of the source of the data I'll be summarizing for you here in a moment. And as Simon said, we're going to do a very quick tour of 5 key learnings in just a few minutes, so we'll go fast. So first, you might have seen this chart before where we ask people to classify themselves into one of these 8 groupings to best describe where they stand in their COVID journey. And what we're seeing here is while many are settling or have settled into new routines, we're seeing a slow and steady increase in the percentage of people beginning to resume some of their previous activities. Now, keep in mind, we're looking at international roll-up numbers here, and the numbers do vary quite a bit from country to country, with China kind of in the lead in terms of reentry. But you can see kind of this slow and steady march towards a restart where people are doing some things that were previously restricted. But just because we might be starting that march, that doesn't mean that we are entirely comfortable with it. So learning number 1 is, yes, the march has started, but no, we're not entirely comfortable. And there's a lot of international anxiousness around this, which is portrayed by these yellow lines here. You can see how people kind of respond to this question about resuming normal activities and how anxious that makes them feel. A lot of variation by country. You see a lot of intensity around this in India. We're going to shine a spotlight on that later. But I think there is this growing recognition that we're not going to be returning to those lives that we knew anytime soon. In fact, we also ask people how long they think it'll take before things feel like they're returning to normal. And in the past few weeks alone, we've seen more and more people in almost every single country giving a longer time frame in their answer. All right, so that's item number one. Item number two, this slide is also organized around those phases that I talked about before. So they're kind of running along the bottom here as you read left to right. But this time we're looking at the emotions that people convey at each phase. And what we see is that as people settle into routines, the anxiety levels, the negative emotions, they come down. But when they're faced with the reality of reentry, those emotions start to return a bit. Now, as a side-by-side with the quantitative work we do in Essentials, we also do a global longitudinal ethnography to track people on their COVID journey. And one of the families that we follow is from Italy. And we followed Marissa and Michelle and their children throughout this journey. And in a lot of ways, they exemplify the ambivalence with which many are regarding reentry. And the quote here on the far right tells a lot, right? It says, I got used to this new life with more time with our kids. And it's going to be really hard to go back to previous rhythms. I think they share the sentiments of a lot of parents as we head back into reentry. All right. Point number three, shifting gears on you a little bit here. So another thing that we see is a very strong relationship between financial health and emotional. And what we're portraying graphically here is the difference between lower income households who have been dealt a recent financial blow compared to other households that have not. That have been more financially stable. And you can see that the percentages are so much higher of people who say, I feel lonely, disconnected, defeated, impatient, frustrated. We also have similar data points around, feeling scared or overwhelmed. Also important to note that younger people are feeling disproportionately negative in this period. I'm going to show you on the next slide why that's the case. While households with folks over 50 years old tend to share a more kind of confident, pragmatic positivity right now. So that's point number three, big relationship between financial and emotional health. Point number four, kind of linked to the last one. Is that there is a lot of pessimism right now about job restoration. And of course, that does tend to portend a bit of a stormy economic weather, right? And we do see these younger and larger households really struggling. The data there on the left are showing the degree to which people agree with this statement that jobs are going to return when the lockdown restrictions lift. And as you can see, there's a lot of skepticism that will indeed be the case. Further, if you look at some of the points to the right, a quarter of our international respondents tell us that they've either lost a job or that their salary's been reduced. Another third are concerned about their ability to pay their bills. And again, these financial setbacks are being disproportionately felt by people 35 and under, people under 50, and younger households with lots of kids in the home. They also disagree that the economy is going to recover very quickly. So unfortunately, sorry to be a bit of a downer here, but the fourth big point is the consumer outlook around jobs is not particularly strong. The fifth point, and once again here we are organizing a slide around the phases, okay? Now this time we're looking at how spikes in purchase behavior for consumer staples often correspond in spikes in anxiety as people move through the phases of adjustment. So it's kind of remarkable here when you compare the shape of the behavioral curves on the bottom half of the slide and the fear curve on the top. They travel very, very much in concert with one another. Further to that point, we also see that when people endure financial impact or think it's about to happen to them, their purchase intentions, their purchase behaviors become much more dynamic. They tend to go into hoarding mode. So I think the big takeaway here is when we get scared, we tend to react by purchasing more in those periods, and you kind of see how that plays out by phase. So to recap those 5 things to know quickly, we are facing a gradual reentry, and it's probably going to be marked by ambivalence. The second big point, anxiety does tend to fade as we settle into routines, but it can pop back up as we face reentry into a mysterious future. The third point, there is a relationship between financial and emotional health. Many who have endured or fear financial setbacks, they feel overwhelmed, they feel frustrated, but the financially stable do carry a more calm confidence. Fourth, for many, the personal finance forecast is not particularly sunny. And again, younger multi-person households are particularly feeling that strain. And then last, fear and behavioral adjustments, they do seem to travel together per that last slide that I shared with you. So this, of course, begs the question, well, what does all this mean for brands as we move forward? And while brands need to operate with sensitivity right now, they also play an important role in the economy, and people are eager for economic recovery. And as we've discussed in this space previously, brands do have a unique opportunity to deeply connect in today's disrupted context. Third, it is important for brands to balance striking the right tone in a very anxious time with the need to communicate their point of distinction. Fourth, while there are some common themes, right, that can be thought of globally, of course, activation is going to have to happen locally. And all this is not about profiting from a crisis. It's about managing a brand wisely during a crisis. So more to come on brand and shopping behavior in coming webinars. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And back to you, Simon.
Oh, thank you, Chris, and I'm looking forward to taking the story forward in our next session. And I guess it leads us on to one of the big questions is what does this mean for some of the world's major markets? India, 1.4 billion people have been under lockdown in recent weeks. Rinku, we're delighted to have you with us, I should say, from your home in Delhi. Let's hear a bit more about that in a moment. I gather we've entered a new phase this week in India, and by no means is it the case that things are back to normal. I wondered if you could just share with us where we are at the moment on the ground.
Yes, Simon, you're absolutely right. We have entered what we call the lockdown 5.0 because that's the 5th stage of lockdown that we have entered. A lot of things have opened up for us, and you can go out to the markets, you can go to the parks kind of thing. But yes, you did touch upon the reason why I'm talking to you from my home, while some of my colleagues are actually working from my office in Gurugram, is because I live in a different state and my office is in the neighboring state and our borders are still closed. So other than the essential services, one cannot actually cross the border. And that's the reason why some of us continue working from home. That also means for some of our clients actually, wherein the manufacturing units also haven't really been producing up to capacity because of certain restrictions that's been laid down, and also because of the movement that's there.
Gosh, and so with that in mind, it's been the disruption continues, supply chains disrupted, you can't get to work. How's it been for you personally? How would you describe the experience? Because this has been going on since the end of March, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The lockdown happened about March 24th, but we in Ipsos India started working from home actually a week in advance, keeping in mind, the safety of our employees. So it's been, when we went down for lockdown, I don't think anybody of us thought that it would be this long. It's been really, really long. I mean, I personally thought it would be at best, say, 3 weeks kind of a lockdown. One big thing that happened due to lockdown is in India, most of us are used to, I would say, lucky to have the domestic help to actually take care of a lot of our household chores. And that's true across any Indian household that you would go to. So with lockdown, the domestic help stopped coming. So there was absolute chaos actually that was there because you're not used to cleaning, cooking, washing of utensils and everything. And of course, your work calendar, like for most of us, was filling in faster and for longer hours. So it did take about 7 to 8 days when we managed our household chores, divided it between me and my husband. And, we went into a new routine, and with our work as well as for our household routine. So it's a new routine that we got used to it about in a week or so. But also, Simon, the lockdown had a positive impact on me, I would say, because I was traveling 2.5 hours commute every day, and I saved on that time that I had. What it helped me do is I, at my own ease in the morning, could actually do my online exercise with my trainer and still log into work at 9:30, which I anyway used to do, but I had to commute, so I used to always have a very hectic kind of morning prior to lockdown. And in the evening, I actually spent a lot of time with my family, especially with my dad, who wanted to connect with his kids and my siblings and stuff. So there was more of a family, I would say, family gathering, family kind of a thing on Zoom. And my dad, who's 80 plus, who's absolutely non-tech savvy, actually has got used to using Zoom and is looking forward to it more than any of us. So that's something that's there. But I guess it's also the fear of the unknown. I mean, Craig did talk about there's a fear of travel. You don't know when you're going to meet next. So these are the things that have happened to me actually personally.
And what's I mean, I think Chris talked about ambivalence, and I'm sensing that a bit from your own experience about what happens next. Just finally for me, just to thinking about perhaps what we should be watching if we're watching India in the coming period. What are the big things we should look out for in terms of how behaviours may change over the coming weeks and months?
So tech adoption has absolutely expedited for everybody in India. Probably what would have taken, say, a couple of years. If we see that change actually happening in the last 2 months. You have homeschooling, you have entertainment that all of us are into it. We do a lot of our utility, payment of bills, banking, you name it. Actually, the entire Indian consumer is actually using tech a lot more. And what we are also seeing this, it's got a wide expanse actually. It's cut across the socio-economic classification. It's gone down to the tier town, smaller tier cities and towns. And even, you do hear of rural consumers also accessing it. And it's cut the age band. So yes, maybe going forward, you don't know whether we will be using as much as we are doing now, but it's definitely here to stay, and the adoption has happened for the positive. And I would say the next one, Simon, is the fact that I did talk about, the domestic help part of it, and that's for a bigger set of Indian middle class consumer, and that forms a big base of our population. I think with what the lockdown has done has made us, all of us as Indian consumers, be more self-reliant. You do see a lot of behavior change that's happening there. There are a lot more that people want to do on their own. Yes, you would see that there would be more number of maybe gadgets and durables that consumers could be buying to aid them in self-reliance. But this, I guess, is here to stay for two reasons. I would say one is, of course, the virus is not going to go away. So you want to, of course, there's a fear of virus. You want to avoid as much as of an interaction with anybody coming into the house. And there's also a financial worry that's there, with the economy not doing that great. That's another one of saving that you're doing without really employing somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we could go on. What I'm going to mention to people on the webinar is that we put together a web page with all of the latest India research, which will come with this deck afterwards. Thank you so much, Rinku, for joining us. I'm going to hand back to Jennifer in Milan. Jennifer.
Yes, in Milan, from Milan to Delhi. Rinku, thanks so much for sharing this personal perspective. Very interesting. I was wondering what this all means for our job in terms of for doing research in India today.
Yeah, in fact, it has a big impact, Jennifer. Primarily the fact that, as you know, in India, we are a face-to-face market. Most of our data collection is actually face-to-face. When we went in for a lockdown, that's the biggest impact that we had. All of a sudden, we were faced as an industry that, there was no fieldwork that was possible. It's not an easy state for our clients to be in a completely data dark kind of a situation. So what we did is, in fact, the moment lockdown happened, we took, in terms of took stock of, where all projects that were actually on field, converted them to online or wherever feasible, or we converted them to telephonic interaction. And post that, in fact, any briefs that has come up, the team is geared up to actually think of online first. so that we move towards a phase where we are talking more online and actually adapting to a methodology which is more online. So that's something, and we were able to actually convert different modules of the trackers, do a lot of quantitative. We did a huge amount of focus group discussion online, and we did a lot of even immersions and observations for most of our clients online. So this endeavor of push towards online is here to stay, and I think that's a big change for us in the MR industry in India.
Great, thanks. Very interesting, a great thrust towards change for us all. And Nick, we're going to move to Germany, and we're going to hear more about how we are transforming our ways of working. Right, Nick?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. And I would like to talk just shortly about product development, also the meaning of products and the new realities which we are facing right now. And if you think about it, a product is really the core of any marketing mix model and really the physical manifestation of a brand promise. I mean, you can do a lot with awareness and marketing communication, but if you think about what is driving repeat, that is the product itself. So we know that businesses are more successful if they continue to develop and improve their products. If we think about it, for instance, in the product life cycle, which you can see on the left side, in the area of cost savings, we see that now with COVID-19, the supply chains are being impacted, and you may need to choose a different supplier for ingredients or need to think about more cost-efficient ingredients, and that's why it's necessary to improve and adapt the products even during a crisis. We've done a recent, very interesting study in the UK. We analyzed what product features and claims are relevant for consumers during this time. And we saw, for instance, that immunity boosting and also sustainable dimensions were very important. And that implies that, if you're thinking about developing a product or if you're in a prototype phase, there are these features which you can think about which are important for the market. So we know that product development is important, and there are three simple ways to what you need to think about. One is think contactless. The second is really use the technology which is existing. And the third is, for instance, using different data sources such as e-commerce ratings and reviews. And we're going to talk about these three things in particular now. So if we're thinking about think contactless, product testing means that we're exchanging products to consumers, and we need to make sure that the consumers, our clients, our staff are safe in the COVID-19 situation. And we have some good examples from China where they used an app to film how the products were being handled, sanitized, and this was necessary because it provided trust to the consumers that the products are sanitized and safe to use, in particular if you think about blind products. So it makes sense to show consumers such videos to show that their products are safe. In Thailand, we can see that they were doing a street recruitment, but also keeping the safety of the social distance 6 feet apart when they were recruiting, and the discussion about product improvement areas. You can also see in the other picture how the consumers are sitting in a safe way apart of each other, wearing a face mask. Plus, of course, we even have our own sanitizer, which we created together with the supplier to make sure that the products are being really cleaned and safe to use. As well, you can see the thermometer on the left side, which we use when we are doing face-to-face interviews with, of course, keeping social distance and making sure it's contactless, that we measured, for instance, the temperature of the consumers. The other area is to think about, or leverage technology. And if you're thinking about, the typical in-person labs where you have consumers testing the products, which you see on the left side, this is a real study which we've done in Nigeria. You can see that the consumers are in a room, but in the COVID-19 situation, this is not possible. So it makes sense to go into a virtual lab where you have the consumers sitting together and testing the products. You can control by having a moderator show how the products are being used, and given that you have the cams on, you can actually see how if the consumers are using the products properly. The great advantage here, if you think about digital area of virtualizing a lab, you can have also your stakeholders join in from different departments, which is of course a little bit difficult in an in-person lab. So you can have R&D, you can have marketing and communication sitting together and discussing what that means for the communication, but also for the packaging as well. The other area is using different data sources, particularly e-commerce rating and reviews. So what we do is, or what the industry is doing, is they're applying artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing to analyze different topics which appear in e-commerce ratings and reviews. And these are then clustered into themes. And the good thing here is you can track them over time in terms of what is important on the development of product improvement. If you think about it, and it even makes sense, particularly during now this time, if you do kind of a pre-COVID and post-COVID assessment in terms of how consumers are changing their attitudes towards products. And now if you think about that, there are about, in some markets, 30 to 40% of fake reviews. These need to be, of course, analyzed and identified. And there are, of course, algorithms existing to identify that, as well as sarcasm or idioms as well. Now, just to summarize, now is really the time to plant the seeds for the future in product success. We know that indeed businesses are more successful if they continue to adapt and improve their product during a crisis. Why? Because they have a competitive head start, and the products and the portfolio is more adapted to the particular situation or to the needs of the consumers. And this really covers the complete life cycle. So it really makes sense to, what I said is think digital, use new technologies, make sure that you're doing the testing in a contactless and safe way, and also think about different data sources, which I have given as an example. So this was just kind of a short overview, and we're happy to further discuss this in terms of what this means for a particular market. Thank you.
This was fascinating, Nick. Thank you so much. And I think all of us would agree that this, what you were mentioning at the beginning, of this tangible aspect of the product being the body of the brand, and we've seen in previous Signals webinars how people may be quite open to trying new things in these disruptive moments, right, and for routines. But it seems that you and your teams around the world have been really on a super acceleration mode to get all these new ways of working going, and really figuring out how to be able to help our, our clients. How has that been? Tell us about your experience.
That's a very good question. Right. Indeed. It is a challenge, of course, because as you know yourself, the COVID-19 situation is in each market very different, and also the restrictions that are in place, which are necessary to make sure that the pandemic is not spreading forward. It was a real team effort to identify which measures make sense, which are applicable to the most markets. It has been challenging, but also a great team effort, I must say, in particular if you think about what new ideas are popping up, which is driving digitalization as well.
Great. Yes. So I guess it's also taking us into a new space in terms of thinking about new things that we may be able to do in the future, which is very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing this this great story with us, and more about new things that we have to be thinking about once these products are nice and ready, and that we can go and buy them in the stores or wherever we want, right, Craig? And from Germany to very early morning in the US, because our poor colleagues Chris and Craig are almost in the middle of the night.
Yeah, back in the good old days, we could travel out to things like these and talk and meet people, but now it's 2:30 in the morning and here I am. So, but good to be here anyway. But yeah, what I want to talk about for a few moments is just adapting to our new realities. There is a new environment for consumers, and there's a lot of compliance to be dealt with as we go out there and re-emerge. And my father now says there's two eras. It used to be, it's now BC, before COVID, and AD, which is after distancing. So we're now moving into that kind of after distancing space. And these photographs here are taken from a team of mystery shoppers we sent out in the US just last week, and gathered all kinds of images from around the place in terms of testing, which I'll talk about later on. But all of us are now facing this new reality where we're wearing masks, we're dealing in grocery stores, we're having strange situations, and the biggest thing driving us it comes is there's no surprises, fear. And we've done a survey just recently across the US, and we've found that the stakes for reopening safely are very high. So 3 in 4 consumers have said they'll delay returning to shops once restrictions are limited. 61% are citing fear of getting sick as the reason for delays, but 1 in 4 will pay more for services if they think that brands are doing a superior job in keeping them safe. And 62% of consumers would stop shopping at a brand if they felt like they were not taking things seriously. So as we move forward, we know that ultimately safe business will be good business, and we're all in countries around the world that there's nothing else on the news other than coronavirus, and we're probably all sick of it, but we're all sort of not wanting to get sick either. So safe business will be good business. Brands that excel will strengthen customer loyalty. So in our studies that we've done in the US, and which will roll out around the world shortly, we've found that 62% of people will stop shopping at retailers, as I mentioned, but 10% will pay more at premium for brands they feel are doing a superior job. So we've recently launched a syndicated health and safety index, and the first thing we wanted to know is what are the things that are important to consumers as they come out of lockdown and begin to go back out into physical brick and mortar locations. So we wanted to first understand what are their attitudes towards health and safety. What can brands do to make consumers feel safe while they are shopping? And then what can brands do proactively to manage the health and safety of their employees and their customers? So a lot of words on this slide, but we took 20 measures of various things that stores and brands were being asked to do within their physical locations. And this also includes buy online, pick up in store, we call BOPIS, or delivery as well. So things like social distancing markers inside the stores, one-way aisles, sanitizing wipes, those kinds of attributes. We wanted to hear from consumers exactly what was important to them. We came out with about 6 items. So first of all, the most important thing was employees wearing masks. Secondly, employees wearing gloves. Thirdly, making sure there was hand sanitizer available in the entrance and restrooms. It's 5 actually. Fourth is sanitizing wipes available. And 5th is social distancing markers outside the store. So these are the things that were most important to consumers to feel safe as they came out of lockdown. Things like contactless payments were also important. Things like being able to wash your hands and dry your hands in the bathrooms without having to make contact with anything. Open doors without making contact, also very important. But these were the 5 things that came through in the studies that we did that were the most important. So what we've found is, in terms of takeaways for brands, is that visible cues and consistency in actions matter. So people, as they're going out and shopping, want to know that if employees are supposed to wear masks, they're all wearing masks. If there's supposed to be social distancing markers or announcements going on, that it's across every store in the brand. And what we've seen on the news often is that the brands think they're doing something, and then the news or social media or customers going in and taking video is showing something else. So we've seen a huge number of those occur, where what is going on the ground is quite different to what the brand thinks it's doing. So those visible cues and consistency matters. Secondly, employees are the #1 asset. In other words, consumers want to know that brands are taking care of their employees, and that employees aren't being forced to come back for necessary jobs and being put in unsafe positions. Finally, consumer preferences are quickly evolving, and so brands have to be ready to adapt quickly when they need to. The health and safety index that we launched in the US, we then sent mystery shoppers to 6,000 USA locations, and that was covering 45 major brands across retail, big box, across DIY stores, gas stations, restaurants, etc. And we were looking at how well brands are complying with the new health and safety requirements, how consistent that experience was, and how are customers behaving and reacting to the new health and safety requirements. So very much in line with the study that I mentioned earlier, which was around understanding what consumers were feeling and thinking. So we saw some really good things. We saw a lot of, hand sanitizing in cart stations. We saw a lot of social distancing markers, and these are across brands that may not be that large and that well known, but they're still trying to comply with new standards. Clear social distancing signages out there as well. We saw some things that weren't so good. Sometimes there's just no signage. Staff are very inconsistent in the wearing of masks. We see mixed signals at checkout. People are passing things back and forth. And then sometimes we see customers who are taking precautions and staff who are not. So just a lot of things that we saw in the study that were very consistent or inconsistent across a lot of these brands. And the key takeaways from that was compliance is very mixed. What we did find in the US study anyway was that some of the most high-end brands, the Trader Joe's, the Whole Foods, the Costco's, performed very well. They'd taken this very seriously, and all those brands I mentioned had also gone through a real iteration where they had started out one way, they had to pivot, they had to make some changes based on customer feedback and staff feedback, but they were well rated in terms of what we saw when we went out into the marketplace. We also see that most brands are not providing hand sanitizing or hand washing facilities. So while that is a very important attribute to consumers, brands were not really providing that in a consistent manner across the study that we did. The other thing that was going on is most brands were not really actively managing occupancy or doing visible cleaning. So consumers really wanted to make sure that they weren't going into crowded stores and standing next to people and not being able to distance in the manner they're supposed to. And they like to see staff cleaning. So we didn't see that going on as much as we should have. So reopening requires a safe in-store experience. Brands with physical locations are having to take new additional measures to make sure customers and employees have a safe, worry-free environment. And so it's critical for brands to measure those things, to make sure they're objectively looking at their networks, to make sure that what they're promising, what they're saying with their brands is actually being executed on the front line with the staff, with the customers, with their brand locations. So by measuring those things, they can create a consumer confident environment to build customer trust and loyalty. So that's what we're seeing out there at the moment as we re-emerge and go back into retail and shopping and all that fun stuff that we're about to do. Thanks.
Great, Craig. Thanks very much. And I think those pictures were extremely speaking on their own, because it really showed us things that we're all seeing, I think, around the world in the different places from which we've been speaking today. So that was, I think, my question. I think this was extremely interesting to get a sort of snapshot on what is happening in the US today. I'm wondering if you already have an idea of differences or peculiarities from around the world. You know, in different countries, are things working out differently, or what's your point of view on that?
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. I mean, we're talking to our teams. We have a lot of personal anecdotes. Obviously, we all have our stories, but we're launching the same study in Canada next week. In fact, we've done the first piece of it, which is the consumer understanding. We're releasing the PR on that next week. The UK follows the week after, and then we're going into several countries in Asia and Latin America and even Africa to repeat that study to see what's going on. But what we're hearing anecdotally is people are very fearful, and Chris mentioned that before, that's the number one thing is people are concerned. So I don't think we're going to see a huge variation as we go around the world, but I think what we will see in terms of what consumers want, but I think we will see a big variation in how brands are executing on the ground. That's been the biggest thing that I've noticed from what we've uncovered.
Great, and we can't wait to see those results from other places. So maybe in the next session you'll come and update us on what's going on in other places.
I like being up at 2:30 in the morning. That's absolutely.
Thank you so much for getting up early and for staying up late and to bring all these voices from around the Ipsos world. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all of you who were with us today for our Signals number 6 webinar, and we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.